Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works. Today we're on the IS200 SuperCharger project again. We've got an air intake kit here from BMC Air Filters, which the guys at Raceworks actually supplied for us. And we've also got a stack of silicone over there and some joiners that we're gonna Christmas tree it all together and make it really pretty. Let's get into it. We've got our power steering reservoir just unbolted for now. I'm not exactly sure where it's gonna end up yet, but I've got good old 180 degree 3-inch silicone. It's just a Raceworks one, nice and compact. They're not really bulky, so perfect for this setup. So just gonna go 180 straight off the back of the supercharger. Goes on there pretty well. Got an aluminium joiner. This is actually just 3-inch pipe or tube, sorry, that Hypertune actually supplied for us, and I've just beaded it. So whack it in there as a little joiner. Works pretty well. I think we've got like a 23 degree. Yeah, the 23 degree and 45 degree. So I think I'll try the 45 first. That looks probably the closest to where we're gonna end up at. This one's also a reducer as well as a bend. So it's got 70 mil on this end, which is what our airbox is, and 75 on that end, which is what the piece of aluminium tube is. So it's a very gradual and slight step down, so it's not really going to affect the airflow. And being that this is only probably going to make, I don't know, like 170 or 180 kilowatts, that size is still fine. Like, I always go back to the rule that if the intake's bigger than the throttle body, you're never going to have a problem. I don't know how accurate that is, but I feel as though that if you're trying to jam air into that hole, and that's at least the same size, if not bigger, you shouldn't have a problem. When you're doing this sort of stuff, it's fiddly and there's no real kind of rule or way to look at it and just go, oh, that's going to work pretty easily. I find it's easier to just kind of grab a couple of options. I mentioned before that we had 2 different bends in this silicone, so it gives us a couple of options to play around and move around with stuff, because you could spend hours measuring it up, but you're never going to get 100% accurate measurements straight away. I mean, unless you're doing this for a job, there's probably some secret squirrel trade stuff that I'm not aware of, but for the DIY guy, this will work pretty well. And now we just got to have a look at our filter and see where we're going to sit that. Now, I think I might even shorten that silicone. And if I get super lucky, that may bolt straight to that hole there. The only thing I want to find, some Subarus have like a rubber damper that mounts the stock airbox. If I've got one of them, I can put that in there and that'll be awesome. So I'll have a quick dig around and see if I can locate one of those. And I'll shorten these couple of silicones up, and I reckon that we'll get it right on there. And then the cool thing about these CDA kits, they come with like a cold air snorkel-y type thing, so go straight on the front of the airbox. And for this car, we're just going to run a hole saw through the inner guard and actually run it down probably to the fog light. I'm not sure exactly how low we'll put it yet, being that this does a lot of wet skid pan stuff. If we put it too low, it's going to suck a heap of water, but we'll tuck it in the front bar somewhere in that sort of general area without hopefully drawing too much water. But that's, yeah, so far it's pretty simple installation. It does actually come with a universal mounting bracket for the filter, but I'd like to utilize that factory mounting hole if we can, potentially tied up with one of those rubber mounts that I was talking about before. So I'm gonna have a quick dig through the toolbox and see if I can find one of them. Kind of shows that you probably don't even need a hose clamp for intake stuff, being how tight this is in here, and all I've done is push it into it. I'll probably put some lube on it before it goes back together if we've got to pull it apart again. Or maybe I'll just leave it in there and pretend that never happened. Obviously don't lube any joiners or silicone that are going to be in a boosted setup. Being that this is on the vacuum side, it's not going to matter, but if you lube that up, you're going to have the hose clamp so tight you'll probably crush the pipe or do some other weird stuff. So yeah, don't recommend to lube silicone joiners and stuff on boosted setups. But for this, it's not going to be a problem. Just going to use this hose clamp as our cut line again, similar to the way we did the other day, but because I've now got some pipe to cut against, it's a heap easier. You can also run a cigarette lighter around the edge of it just to tighten up the fraying fabric on the inside of the joiner, but I think for this one will be pretty good. It's not too bad, this one, so we'll throw it together. I'll just take this part number label off too. Handy little tip when you're taking off stickers from hoses and silicone joiners, especially with radiator hoses, just give it a squish. It actually breaks the paper so you don't have to go picking the edges off for hours on end. Unfortunately, I didn't have the rubber mount that I was previously speaking about, so we're just going to make our own version of it. I've just got a bit of 5/16 fuel hose here. I think this is probably one that would have come with a fuel pump originally. It was just the same thing. It was in that drawer in my toolbox. So we're going to cut 2 sections of rubber. It's actually going to sandwich this air filter bracket, and I'll throw it on the ground. And then we're just going to Loctite that into the body so that it won't wind its way out, because it's not actually going to have a crush tube or anything in it, but it'll be enough tension that it will just start to squash down on the hose and support it. So I'm just going to chop a short piece. This blade is junk. That one's even worse. Stupid knives. Oh look, that's what happens when you got a sharp knife. Cool. We've now got our air filter all mocked up, so I want to punch a hole through this inner guard just for the snorkel, as we've already mentioned. So to do that, I'm just going to take the actual air filter box out. We're going to leave the silicone and everything in there. When we cut the hole, I'm just going to put a rag in that silicone so that no metal swarf goes into the supercharger. It's pretty vital to ensure nothing goes in that blower, because the second there's any kind of metal in there, or even any dust or debris, it can damage the lobes of the blower. So it will still compress air if it's damaged, but it'll be less efficient. So yeah, it's pretty critical to not get any dust or dirt or metal or plastic or any kind of rubbish in there. That's one reason we didn't actually do any driving other than running up and down the car park to test to make sure it was good, because this intake was open. So I don't want to jeopardize the whole conversion by being an idiot and just going running up and down the car park 25 times, and then it sucks dirt. But a little tip for superchargers, make sure you don't get any debris in them. It's also worth mentioning before you go drilling through panels that you can't see behind, make sure that there's no wiring harnesses there or anything in there. I've made that mistake before and actually put a drill bit through the Stages headlight wiring when I was doing the first front conversion on it. And by doing that, it actually joined the headlight circuit to the air conditioning compressor circuit. So every time I turned the headlights on, that meant that the AC compressor was running all the time. That actually resulted in the AC compressor burning out, or the clutch in the AC compressor burning out. So yeah, it pays to spend the extra 5 minutes in checking, and if you're drilling a hole, just use that socket tip we've discussed earlier to stop it going really far through the panel or anything behind it. So another little tip, and also just give it a quick visual. There's nothing on this back side, luckily. The only thing I can see is a connector for the ABS sensor, which we don't actually use anyway, but it's still not going to be in the area of the hole that we're going to drill. So we'll quickly whack this hole saw through, and hopefully we've still got an inner guard to bolt to later. Donk. Ta-da! Make sure you take out your boost bubble wrap. Got our intake duct just quickly cable tied into the fog light hole. I do actually have an air scoop coming for it, which hopefully will fit. I bought it off a magical internet website that showed you one photo, so it'll probably turn up this big instead of this big. So we'll see what happens, but it was like 30 bucks. So I thought it was worth rolling the dice. But for now, that'll work. It's, I mean, it's definitely going to be drawing much better air than if it was in the engine bay. So we've, yeah, I think we've made a few improvements on the setup today. Obviously, the filters being the biggest one. So we'll bring it down and put our return pipe back on the intercooler piping, and then that's pretty much us done. We've got everything mounted up, our intake's in the right spot, we've got our cold air induction tube fitted, and now we've finally got our power steering reservoir located as well. I'm not super happy with it. I'll probably redo something a bit later, but for now it's in a good enough spot. I think we may actually have to make new hoses for it, so they're probably not quite in the correct position they need to be. So I'll probably either go to the wreckers and have a look at other Toyotas and see if we've got something in a similar position, or we'll just make it out of like aftermarket, like Raceworks type hose or something like that. But for now, it's sitting in the correct spot, or correct enough of a spot where it's going to work. The reservoir is pretty level. It's slightly leant back, but as I said, it's not going to matter. So we'll fire it up and see what it sounds like with the filter on it. See if it's quietened it up a bit, or if it's still pretty whiny like a SuperCharger is going to be. Obviously, we're never going to shut this up completely with a aftermarket style intake with no resonator box, but potentially now that it's got this BMC shrouded filter, it could quieten it up a little bit. So we'll fire it up and see what it sounds like. It is definitely quieter at idle. You could hear it whining at idle before. So it still has that blower whine when you start to get into the throttle, but it's definitely a lot quieter than it was. Bit of a short and sweet one today. We've got the intake all done now. We've got our cold air induction run. So now it's time to hit the drags. Cutting out in high revs in some of the upper gears there. It may be the blower bypass valves causing too much strain on that throttle body cable. I've tried adjusting that a couple of times already. I'd say it's still we've just still got to tweak that a little bit. It definitely feels quicker. It feels more responsive, but I guess the timesheet will tell us just how much better it is. I mean, light throttle, it feels way better now than it did before. Doesn't feel like tons more top end, but it definitely feels more responsive in the lower RPM. So even if we don't get more peak power, it's definitely got more poke in the mid-range anyway. Well, as with project cars, sometimes things don't go 100% to plan. We've had a couple of attempts now at trying to take this down the track at Sydney Dragway. Long story short, the throttle bodies on these are super sensitive. Speaking with the guys from Rank 1, they've had a lot of issues lately with this style of e-throttle throttle body. It's like a really old, complicated system. Unfortunately, the only way to get rid of this is to actually change the ECU. So at this point, we're probably going to go to a Haltech 750 wide in a piggyback configuration. It's not quite the way we plan to do it, but for our particular setup, it's the only way we're going to get it to work reliably. The guys at Rank 1 have had plenty of success using the stock ECU with this throttle body. Unfortunately, we've gone through 2 or 3 trying to chase the problem, and we get the same result every time, regardless of what we try and do with the throttle body. And after speaking more and more with those guys, they've actually found that there's a bearing that seizes in this throttle body. It is serviceable, but to be perfectly honest, it's a pretty garbage e-throttle system anyway. It's not like any of the later model systems where you've got all of it in one unit. Like, it's massively bulky, and there's 2 separate TPSs, and then you've got an external motor, and there's so much sort of there's no throttle response. Like, you've got to move the throttle that much to get 40% throttle. So what we're actually going to do, well, what I think we're going to do is basically modify this so it's back to a traditional cable style throttle body, and then whack on the Haltech Elite. Yeah, it's a bit of a bummer because I did want to install it the way they had intended, but on the same token, I also want it to work 100%. So we're going to, yeah, I'd say we're going to go 750 and whack it all back together and take it to Scotty and tune it. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.